This series is sponsored by Brilliant. Stick around to the end of the video to learn more. What is life? It's a question that, even if you've never explicitly asked, you're already deeply familiar with. You, your family, your pets, all the food that you eat, everything around you all the time is either something that is alive, is directly affected by things that are alive, or something that has a direct effect on things that are alive. Life is a diverse and wild thing. It comes in all shapes and sizes, in almost every conceivable environment. It does amazing things and always finds a way to persist, even in the most catastrophic conditions. And best of all, life has a tendency to break all of the rules that it makes. As soon as you think you've got it figured out, all you need to do is look under the next rock and your mind will be blown all over again. Biology is the study of life. But you don't need to be an old dude with a big white beard and a long white coat to be a part of it. In fact, if you've ever been to a zoo or an aquarium, or made a choice of what to eat, or tuned into a nature documentary, or taken a shower, or gone hunting or fishing, or out for a hike in the park, or been to a doctor, or played with a pet, or spent time with your family, or swam in the ocean, or looked for a four-leaf clover, or just existed for a while, you've interacted with this field. An understanding of biology is useful for every single person, no matter what your background or your goals may be, because it teaches you important things like how to keep yourself healthy, and how to ask better questions about the world around you. And more than anything, it instills a profound sense of wonder and appreciation for every single living thing, no matter how small. Biology is about more than just memorizing facts. It's about understanding the processes and systems that make up and drive life itself. It's about developing a deep curiosity for the world that you live in. It's about discovering the unexpected connections between vastly different concepts. It's about being as excited by the individual pieces as you are about the whole puzzle. It's about exploring and learning about all different fields of science, and even some things that you might not initially think of as scientific. And more than all of that, as life is a natural function of the universe, biology is a mirror through which we can see ourselves in the cosmos. Biology is all about the love of life and of living. Everything goes into biology, and as long as you're alive, biology is everything. So let's learn a little bit about life. Welcome to BioLogic. Everything that has mass and takes up space is called matter, and matter is made of atoms. That includes you, the device you're using to watch this, the air around you, every other living and non-living substance on the planet itself, every other planet, our star, and every other star and nebula and galaxy in the entire universe. Every bit of everything that is either a solid, a liquid, or a gas is made up of these tiny units of matter. As of today, we know of 118 different kinds of atoms, each one of which has its own spot on the periodic table. Each distinct kind of atom is called an element, and elements are the most fundamental units of any particular substance. For example, if you were to break an iron bar in half, the two pieces would still be made of iron. But if you were to break an iron atom in half, the two pieces wouldn't be iron anymore. This is important because it means that elements can't be changed through chemical reactions. They can be physically split and they can be physically built, but whenever they make or break chemical bonds, they stay the element that they are and they retain all the properties of that element. Of the 118 elements that we know to exist, 92 are naturally occurring, which means we can find them out in the universe without a human needing to make them. And among those are all of the elements needed to make life. Elements that an organism needs to live a healthy life and reproduce are called essential elements, and these vary a bit from species to species. For example, humans need 25 elements, but plants only need 17. But some of these are the same across the board. In fact, just 4 elements, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, make up around 96% of all living matter. Calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, and a few more make up most of the remaining 4%, but there's still a tiny fraction of a percentage left. These elements, which are only required in tiny quantities, are called trace elements. For example, almost all life on Earth requires a very small amount of iron to survive. You use it in your blood to carry oxygen. Another trace element is iodine, which you use to make important hormones in your thyroid. Even though iodine makes up less than 1% of your body weight, even though the daily recommended intake for iodine is around 1/10 of a milligram, without that very small amount of that one particular kind of atom, you would experience symptoms such as fatigue, depression, sudden weight change, hair loss, weakened heartbeat, and a telltale swelling of the thyroid known as goiter. And that all sounds pretty scary, but you probably don't need to worry because it's a trace element, so you only need a tiny amount. If you eat iodized salt or pretty much any seafood at all, you've almost certainly got more than enough to get by. Understanding the elements that make up your body is important, but one single element by itself is rarely useful for life. If you want to build living things, you need to build molecules. A molecule is any grouping of two or more atoms stuck together in a chemical bond. Now, sometimes in biology, you'll also hear the word compound. A compound is a specific kind of molecule made of two or more specific elements in a fixed ratio. So, for example, methane is a compound because it's always made of exactly one carbon atom and exactly 4 hydrogen atoms. Ozone is made of 3 oxygen atoms, so it's a molecule, but it's not a compound because it's only made of one element. DNA is also a molecule, and it's made of many different elements. But depending on the stretch of DNA, there can be different amounts of those elements in different ratios, so it's not a compound either. Remember, all compounds are molecules, but not all molecules are compounds. The important thing to remember about molecules is that just like how each individual element has its own properties, each individual molecule does too. And sometimes the properties of a molecule can be wildly different than the properties of the individual elements that went into making it. When something has characteristics that are different than those of its constituent parts, and only exist because those specific constituent parts are together, we call those characteristics emergent properties. There are lots of examples of emergent properties, but compounds are a great way to understand them. Consider, for example, sodium and chlorine. Sodium is a metal which explodes when it touches water, and chlorine is a poisonous gas that was used as a weapon in World War I. And combining these two super dangerous elements in a 1-to-1 ratio produces a compound called sodium chloride, which you know as table salt. That's right, those delicious little rocks that you sprinkle on top of your pretzel are made of two elements that would easily kill you if separated. And that's because the way that a molecule is put together is as important, if not more important, than the things that went into making it. Another compound that you're surely familiar with is water. A water molecule is made of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. And those particular atoms in that particular configuration gives water some amazing emergent properties that are absolutely essential for life. In order to understand what I mean, you need to remember that an atom contains a nucleus, which is made of 1 or more positively charged protons, and usually some neutrally charged neutrons as well. The nucleus is then orbited by 1 or more negatively charged electrons. You also need to remember that opposite charges attract each other, like the north and south poles of a magnet. Oxygen atoms have 8 protons in their nucleus, whereas hydrogen atoms only have 1, which means that the oxygen atom in a water molecule is going to be pulling on those negatively charged electrons a lot harder than the hydrogens can. We call the ability of an atom to attract electrons within a molecule its electronegativity. There are a couple of different factors that go into electronegativity, but those aren't important right now. What is important is that you remember that oxygen is the second most electronegative atom in the universe, second only to fluorine. The result of this unequal electronegativity is an uneven distribution of electrons around the water molecule, leading to the oxygen side having a partial negative charge from all the built-up electrons, and the hydrogen side having a partial positive charge from the relative lack of electrons. These charges make water molecules behave like little magnets, forming weak bonds called hydrogen bonds, as the partial negative side of one molecule comes close to the partial positive side of another molecule. This makes water adhesive, meaning that it sticks to stuff, and it makes it cohesive, meaning that it sticks to itself. And these properties have big implications for life on Earth. They're the reason why water can move up against gravity through the trees, as water evaporating from the leaves tugs on each individual molecule below it, pulling them up through the roots like links on a chain. They're the reason why insects can stay on top of the water, as the weight of the animal itself isn't enough to break the tiny magnetic bonds of the molecules that it's standing on. They're the reason why your sweat cools you down as it evaporates, as the energy required to break these magnetic bonds is drawn from the thermal energy of your body. They're even the reason why ice floats, as water molecules actually move away from each other to form a crystalline structure, making the solid form of water less dense than the liquid form. And that's just the beginning of the amazing things that water can do because of its emergent properties. Water is also a great solvent, being able to break down other substances on a physical and chemical level. And it's a great buffer, being able to absorb acids and bases alike. All of these things are absolutely essential for living things. Life as we know it could not exist without water. And even to this day, every single living thing that we have ever found, down to the smallest microorganism, relies on water to survive. Things like salt and water and methane are relatively simple molecules, made of just a small handful of atoms. But macromolecules are made of hundreds, or thousands, or tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands, or even more atoms. There are 4 major macromolecules that make up life, and those are proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids. All of these are polymers, which means they're made of long chains of smaller molecules called monomers. The monomers that make up a protein are called amino acids. There are about 20 amino acids that are essential for life on Earth, but hundreds more have been discovered. Each amino acid has the same basic structure. There's a central carbon atom with 4 things stuck to it: a single hydrogen, an amino group, a carboxyl group, and a side chain. The side chain can be a variety of different things. In fact, having a different side chain is what constitutes being a different amino acid. Here you can see the side chains of the 20 amino acids that make up life on Earth. Remember, all amino acids have an amino group with 2 hydrogens over here, and a carboxyl group with a hydrogen and an oxygen over here. When 2 amino acids connect to build a protein, this hydrogen and oxygen combine to form a water molecule, leaving the 2 amino acids linked in what's called a peptide bond. We call this process dehydration synthesis, as the protein is formed or synthesized by removing a water molecule or dehydrating. And in order to break a peptide bond, you just reverse the process. Forcing a water molecule in here rebuilds the amino and carboxyl groups and separates the amino acids in a process called hydrolysis, because you're using water, or hydro, to break or lyse the bond. 2 to a few amino acids form a molecule called a peptide. Lots of amino acids form a molecule called a polypeptide. Protein is 1 or more polypeptides that are twisted and coiled and folded and woven together in a very unique way. To make this a little easier, just think of a polypeptide chain like yarn, and a protein like socks or a sweater or a hat. In order to be functional, the yarn has to be coiled up in a very precise way. And if it's coiled in a different way, then the thing you're making isn't going to behave the way that you want it to, because socks usually don't behave like a hat. And just like you can make a lot of different kinds of things with yarn, there are lots of different kinds of proteins. Enzymes are proteins that help to facilitate chemical reactions, like amylase, which helps break down sugars during digestion. Defensive proteins are proteins that protect you against disease, like antibodies that inactivate and help destroy viruses and bacteria. Structural proteins make up the structures all over your body, like the keratin that makes your hair and fingernails. Contractile and motor proteins allow for cellular movement, like the actin and myosin that causes your muscles to flex. And there are plenty of other kinds of proteins that we will surely get into as we progress in this series. Lipids are a diverse group of molecules with a variety of components, but one thing that they all have in common is that they are all hydrophobic, which literally translates to water-fearing, which really just means that they don't mix well with water the way that a hydrophilic or water-loving molecule would. This is why oil and water don't mix, as oil is made of lipids and water is made of, well, water. A common kind of lipid is what's called a triglyceride. A triglyceride molecule is a type of fat, which consists of 3 fatty acid chains connected to a glycerol molecule by way of dehydration synthesis. Those fatty acids are mainly long chains of carbon atoms surrounded by hydrogen atoms. If there's enough hydrogen for every carbon to be bonded to the maximum amount of hydrogen atoms possible, then the chain will be straight, and we call the whole thing a saturated fat because it's completely saturated with hydrogen. However, if a fatty acid contains less than the maximum number of hydrogen atoms, two of the carbon atoms will have to make an extra bond with each other, causing a bend in the chain and creating what's called an unsaturated fat. This geometric difference has big implications on the properties of saturated and unsaturated fats. Saturated fats are more uniform in shape, so they can stack more evenly and pack in more tightly, meaning that they usually stay solid at room temperature. Whereas unsaturated fats are less uniform, don't stack as evenly or pack as closely, and usually remain liquid at room temperature. Unsaturated fats are cheaper to produce, but saturated fats typically have a longer shelf life because oxygen can't penetrate their solid form as easily. So sometimes food manufacturers will try to chemically force unsaturated fats to become saturated by forcing in extra hydrogen in a process called hydrogenation. Unfortunately, hydrogenation also creates a particularly unhealthy kind of fat called a trans fat, which can lead to things like heart disease. While trans fats should be avoided and saturated fats should be limited, not all fats are unhealthy. In fact, as we progress in this series, you'll see that fats play a variety of important roles all throughout your body, and some fats are even an essential part of a healthy diet. Another interesting type of lipid is steroids. All steroids have a similar molecular structure, with 4 fused carbon rings. But despite their similar structures, the different types of steroids perform vastly different functions. For example, cortisol, cholesterol, testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone are all steroids, and they do very, very different things. Carbohydrates are chains of sugars, and just like with amino acids, there are lots and lots of different kinds of sugars out there. A common one that you've probably heard of is glucose, which has the chemical formula C6H12O6. That's 6 carbon atoms, 12 hydrogen atoms, and 6 oxygen atoms. To make glucose, you just arrange those atoms in this configuration. But if you arrange them this way, you get a totally different sugar called galactose. And if you arrange them in this way, you get another different sugar called fructose. By the way, when different molecules have the same molecular formula but different molecular structures, that is to say, they're made of the same atoms but in different configurations, we call those isomers. Stacking sugars together in different ways makes new carbohydrates. For example, 1 glucose and 1 fructose together makes sucrose or table sugar, whereas 1 glucose and 1 galactose together makes lactose, which is the sugar that's found in milk. And you'll never guess what binds these sugars together. That's right, it's dehydration synthesis. One sugar molecule by itself, like glucose, fructose, or ribose, is called a monosaccharide, or one sugar. 2 sugars connected together, like sucrose, lactose, or maltose, is called a disaccharide, or 2 sugars. 3 or more sugars in a chain, like glycogen, cellulose, or starch, is called a polysaccharide, or many sugars. All of these things, and many, many more, are what are collectively known as carbohydrates. And finally, there's nucleic acids. Now, there are 2 kinds of nucleic acids in the world: ribose nucleic acid, or RNA, and deoxyribose nucleic acid, or DNA. Nucleic acids are made of nucleotides, which themselves are made of 3 things: a 5-carbon sugar, a phosphate group, and one of the 5 nitrogenous bases, known as adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine, and uracil. Adenine, guanine, and cytosine can be found in any nucleic acid, but thymine is only found in DNA, and uracil is only found in RNA. A nucleic acid is composed of the sugars and phosphates alternating to form a backbone, upon which the nitrogenous bases attach. Each phosphate is connected to the next sugar by what's called a phosphodiester bond, which is formed through, you guessed it, dehydration synthesis. The specific sequence of nitrogenous bases, commonly known as letters within a nucleic acid, make up the instructions for building polypeptides from amino acids. We'll talk about how all that works in another episode. To make double-stranded DNA, 2 of these chains connect and coil around each other, forming a double helix shape. This DNA behind me actually coils backwards, and most people watching would never notice that. But some people do, and it really annoys them, and that brings me great joy. Considering that all life forms are comprised of pretty much the same basic atoms and molecules, you might assume that life is pretty uniform. In fact, life is so diverse that we have a complex hierarchical system just to try to keep track of it and organize it. Our classification system is broken down into 8 parts: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Domain is the largest group, and each group below it gets progressively more specific until you're talking about one individual species. Let's demonstrate that with a species that you know. There are three domains of life: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Bacteria and archaea are very simple and only exist as single cells, but the organism that we're looking for is more complex, so we'll go with eukarya. Within the eukarya domain, there are four kingdoms: Plantae, Fungi, Protista, and Animalia, or as it's sometimes called, Metazoa. The organism that we're looking for is an animal, so we can disregard the other kingdoms. Within the animal kingdom, there are a few dozen phyla. Some of the most commonly talked about ones are Cnidaria, things like jellyfish and coral, Mollusca, things like snails, Arthropoda, things like insects and spiders, and Chordata, which is anything with a dorsal nerve cord. The organism that we're looking for has a spinal cord, so we'll look into that phylum. Within the phylum Chordata, there are 5 classes. Those are fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. The organism that we're looking for has fur and the ability to lactate, so that means it's in the class Mammalia. Among the mammals, there are a couple dozen orders, including Chiroptera, which are bats, Cetacea, like whales, Marsupialia, like kangaroos, Proboscidea, like elephants, and Carnivora, like tigers. But the animal that we're looking for has opposable thumbs, fingernails instead of claws, a big brain, and stereoscopic vision, so that lands it in the order Primates. Within the primate order, there are a few dozen families, including the lemurs and the gibbons, but the organism that we're looking for lacks an external tail and has distinctive molar teeth in what's called a Y5 pattern, so they're going in the great ape family, Hominidae. There are just 4 genera within the Hominidae family: Pan, Gorilla, Pongo, and Homo. The organism we're looking for is bipedal, so that rules out the first 3 of them and leads us to Homo. And while there have been many species of Homo that lived throughout the years, including Homo erectus, Homo rudolfensis, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo neanderthalis, there's only one species that is still alive today, and that is Homo sapiens. That's us, in case you missed it. So now we understand a little bit more about the things that make life and how life is classified, but we haven't addressed the question from the very beginning of the episode. What is life? This may be surprising to hear, but there actually isn't one set functional definition for life. And that's because life tends to defy all attempts at simplification. So instead, we recognize life by what it does. Specifically, life has 7 distinctive properties. Number 1 is order. Function goes along with form. Even things like slime molds that look like an amorphous blob are remarkably organized. Number 2 is growth and development. Life doesn't just pop into existence and pop back out. It comes in set stages that we can recognize. Number 3 is regulation. Homeostasis is the term for maintaining a stable internal environment within the body that's isolated and independent from the external environment outside of the body. All living things do this. Number 4 is energy conversion, taking in energy from elsewhere and using it to keep yourself alive. This can be done through eating or through photosynthesis, and sometimes through chemosynthesis. We'll talk about all those later. Number 5 is response to stimuli. This can come in lots of different forms, from turning your head to look in the direction of a sound, or blooming when the sun shines. Number 6 is reproduction. You don't have to have children to be considered alive, but life in general tends to make more of itself. And once that starts happening, you get to number 7, evolution. Living things aren't perfect copy machines. As they reproduce, each generation is slightly different from the last, and eventually, those little changes add up to big differences. To learn more about that, check out my series called The Light of Evolution. So let's recap. All matter in the universe is made up of atoms. There are 118 different kinds of atoms that we know about so far, but you only need a small portion of them to make life. Atoms make molecules, which make macromolecules like proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates and nucleic acids. Macromolecules make organelles, which are the tiny parts of cells, which we'll talk about in the next episode. Together, a bunch of cells with a similar structure that function together are called a tissue. And a bunch of different tissues combined to do a single structure with one particular function is called an organ. Organs also work together to perform bigger functions in what are called organ systems. And organ systems working together is what creates organisms like you and me. A group of the same kind of organism is called a population. Several populations of different organisms is called a community. A community, plus all the non-living things around them, like the rocks, the water, the light, and the temperature, is called an ecosystem. Ecosystems exist within biomes, which are large swaths of the planet defined by their climate, like deserts and rainforests. And all the biomes combined on the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, and the atmosphere make up the biosphere, the whole Earth and every living thing on it. Every level of this hierarchy is critically important, down to the very last atom, because the atoms that make up life participate in what are called biogeochemical cycles, pathways by which the carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus and every other part of every living thing, past, present, and future, move throughout every part of every ecosystem, uniting us all into one global environment. You are inseparably connected to every single part of this world, and that is one of the most important lessons in biology. We've got a lot left to cover, even in this introductory series, so I hope you'll stick around for the next episodes to learn more. But for now, I'm Forrest Valkai. Thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, and all the other stuff you do here on YouTube. Have an awesome rest of your day, and never stop learning. Bye-bye! And now, a word from our sponsor. Brilliant is an awesome educational app that lets you dive into thousands of interactive lessons in math, science, data analysis, programming, and even AI. Every one of their lessons is meticulously crafted by a team of award-winning educators and researchers from prestigious institutions like MIT, Caltech, and Duke, making their programs uniquely effective at teaching you the science that you want to learn most. And the best part is, they're offering my subscribers a chance to try everything that Brilliant has to offer absolutely free for a full 30 days, plus 20% off a subscription to Brilliant Premium if they go to brilliant.org/forrestvalkai or just use the link down in the description below. Brilliant's interactive daily lessons don't just enhance your knowledge, they also help develop your problem-solving skills and foster a powerful daily learning habit. Personally, I'm a big fan of their scientific thinking course. It's a fantastic way to understand the world around you and marvel at the universe's intricate beauty. No matter what your learning goals are, starting with that course is always a smart move. So head on over to brilliant.org/forrestvalkai or just use the link down in the description to try everything that Brilliant has to offer for a full 30 days and enjoy 20% off your annual premium subscription. Thanks so much to Brilliant for sponsoring this video, thanks so much to you for watching it, and I'll see you next time.